Good evening, and welcome back to Shadow Whisper. Tonight we journey deep into the haunting silence of one of America's most mysterious landmarks, the infamous Skull Cliff region of the Grand Canyon. What follows are 8 unsettling true encounters collected from park rangers, hikers, researchers, and emergency responders who came face to face with something beyond explanation hidden within these colossal stone walls. These aren't tales born from folklore or rumor. They're the first-hand confessions of those whose lives were forever changed by what they saw. From photographers capturing images that should never have existed, to rescue teams discovering evidence that defied all logic, each account pulls us closer to the canyon's forbidden heart. For safety and privacy, certain names and locations have been altered, but every chilling detail remains true to the experiences shared. If you're new to Shadow Whisper, be sure to subscribe for nightly journeys into true horror and unexplained mysteries that linger in the dark corners of our world. Tap the bell icon so you never miss what we uncover next, and tell us in the comments if you've ever encountered something unexplainable in the wild. My name is Liam Brooks, and I've been climbing since I was 12. I've done cliffs, towers, frozen waterfalls, and anything that rises higher than it should. But the climb that changed everything happened 2 years ago at the Grand Canyon, near a place locals call Skull Cliff. It wasn't an official route. No guidebook mentioned it. A friend from an online climbing forum sent me a GPS file and said, "You'll want to see this. It's pure vertical. No bolts, no chalk, no records." That was all I needed to hear. I arrived just before sunset. The rock looked golden under the light, sharp and clean like a giant wall of glass. No sound except wind. I strapped on my harness, clipped my rope, and started the climb. The first 30 meters felt normal. Dry rock, easy holds. But halfway up I noticed something odd. There was chalk on the rock, white fingerprints and small marks like someone had climbed just before me. But no one else was supposed to be here. I looked down. My car was the only one parked at the trailhead, no tracks, no other climbers. The chalk looked fresh. I brushed it off and kept going. The sun was almost gone now. The canyon floor sank into shadow. That's when I decided to switch on my helmet camera. I wanted to film the view, but in the video something was wrong. Every time I looked at my screen, it showed another climber below me, moving slowly up the wall. At first I thought it was a reflection or lag. But the person's movements were too real, like careful, steady, exactly matching mine. Except they were climbing in reverse. When I reached up, they reached down. When I leaned right, they leaned left. It looked like a mirror in motion. I shouted down, "Hey, you okay down there?" No answer. But my radio picked up a voice, and soft, broken by static, "Keep climbing. You're almost there." The voice sounded like me. I froze in place. The rock under my fingers felt warm, like it had been in sunlight for hours, even though the night was already cold. My camera feed started flickering. Every few seconds I saw shapes, hands reaching from the cracks, shadows moving behind the stone. I stopped filming and focused on climbing. Every move felt heavier. The rock almost seemed to breathe, expanding slightly each time I exhaled. Then I noticed something worse. The holds I had used a minute ago were gone. Smooth rock. No cracks, no ledges. It was like the wall was erasing itself behind me. I checked my watch, 8:47 p.m. When I looked again, it said 8:47 p.m. Again. And again. The second hand wasn't moving. The air around me grew thick, humming like an electric wire. My rope twitched once, like someone had grabbed it from below. I looked down. No one there. Only that shadowy figure from before, still climbing, but now closer. The outline looked human, but its arms bent wrong, too long, its head tilted upward in perfect silence. The camera light caught its face, pale, smooth with no mouth. I yelled, "Who are you?" My own voice echoed back from the canyon. "Who are you? Who are you? Who are you?" Each echo came from a different place, some high above me, some deep below. That's when I made my mistake. I looked up. There was another climber above me, or maybe it was a reflection again. They moved exactly how I did, only half a second faster. Every time I reached for a hold, they already had it. Every time I blinked, they were closer. I turned off the camera and climbed without looking at anything but the rock. I just wanted to reach the ledge and end it. But when I finally pulled myself over the rim, there was no ledge. The top of the cliff didn't exist anymore. Just another vertical wall stretching into black sky. Panic hit. I looked down. The canyon below was glowing faintly like moonlight bouncing off water. But there was no moon, and the glow was coming from deep inside the rock. I checked my GPS tracker. It said I was 48 meters below ground even though I was still outside on the cliff. That's when I saw it. The climber, or whatever it was, then stopped below me. It tilted its head upward and started to smile. A wide, hollow grin opened across a face that shouldn't have had a mouth. And I realized what it was copying wasn't my climb. It was copying my fear. The rope suddenly went slack like the other end had been cut. I fell about 5 feet before the system caught me. But the anchor, the one I'd placed at the start, wasn't supposed to hold from that direction. Something below was pulling me down slowly, hand over hand. I screamed, clawed at the wall, and somehow unclipped. I don't remember the rest, only that I woke up hours later lying near my car covered in dust, rope tangled around my arm. The camera was still recording. The last frame shows me halfway up the cliff, frozen in place, and another climber standing right above me, reaching down, except my GPS log says I never made it that high. In fact, the data ends halfway up at the same second my camera shows me at the top. When I sent the footage to a friend to verify it, he paused the video and zoomed in on the figure above me. He said, "That's you, Liam. You're climbing toward yourself. I've never climbed again. But sometimes late at night when I hear the wind scraping the windows, it sounds like a rope sliding over rock. And if I close my eyes, I can still feel someone pulling, and slow, steady, as if trying to finish the climb I never did." My name is Evan Hale. I make maps for a living. Not the kind you buy in a store. Real maps, the kind that measure every rock, every slope, every small change in the land. I work with satellites, GPS, and drones. Last year, my company sent me to a remote part of the Grand Canyon called Skull Cliff. The government wanted to check a strange problem. According to their old maps, one side of the canyon didn't match new satellite data. The difference wasn't big, just a few meters, but it made no sense. It was like part of the ground had quietly moved. I drove out there alone. The road was empty for hours. By sunset, I reached the edge of the canyon and set up camp. The wind was sharp and dry. Every sound seemed to travel far. The small crunch of sand, the echo of my own boots. I unpacked my tools, a GPS receiver to get satellite signals, a tripod with a radio antenna, my mapping tablet that showed live coordinates. When I turned it on, I noticed something strange. The ground I stood on wasn't showing up where it should be. According to the map, I was standing 20 meters east, one in midair. I reset the system, checked the signal. Everything worked fine. Still, the land didn't match the data. It was as if the canyon was lying. That night, the wind grew stronger. The tent shook. Around midnight, my GPS alarm went off. It said my tripod had moved by itself. I went outside. The tripod was standing perfectly straight. No sign of movement. But the GPS said it had jumped exactly 27 centimeters east, at the same second over and over again. 02:13:41. The time didn't move. My watch, my tablet, even my phone, they all froze at 02:13:41 for almost a minute before ticking again. When the clock started moving, the desert fell silent. The next morning, I sent my drone to scan the cliff. Every few seconds, the video froze. Small differences appeared between each frame. Shadows shifted when the sun hadn't moved. Something on that cliff was changing. Not quickly, but constantly. Later that day, I found a small stack of stones near the ridge. 3 rocks balanced neatly, the top one white and round like bone. When I touched it, It was colder than the air. I turned to mark the spot on my tablet, but it had already been marked for me. The GPS had saved a point with a strange label, home. A few seconds later, another appeared, home again, but in a different place. Then another. The map began drawing lines between them, forming a shape, like a triangle across the canyon. But one line went across open air, through a part of the canyon that didn't exist. I deleted everything, shut down the GPS, and pulled out the battery. The desert became silent again, but not empty. From far below the cliff, I heard something, a slow dragging sound, like a rope sliding across stone. It stopped when I moved, and when I stood still, it began again. I didn't know it yet, but that sound would follow me for the rest of the trip. I tried to ignore what had happened. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe I was tired. I kept working, collecting data. But every time I checked the map, the same home point appeared again, even on a new file. By the second night, I stopped sleeping. Every time the wind blew, it sounded like someone whispering my name. Soft, stretched, almost careful. The dragging noise came back too, closer each time. At dawn, I decided to climb down the ridge and look. I followed the signal on my GPS to where it said, home. After half an hour, I reached a flat shelf halfway down the canyon wall. And there, carved into the stone, were old survey markers, small metal discs from the 1950s stamped with numbers. Only these weren't numbers I recognized. Each one was stamped with letters forming words. The 3 markers spelled return to surface. At first I laughed. Maybe it was a joke from another cartographer. But then I noticed something impossible. These discs were brand new. No rust, no dust, no aging. They looked like they'd been placed yesterday. I climbed back up fast. When I reached camp, the tripod light was flashing red. The logger said someone had connected remotely. The data file from my drone had been opened, copied, and locked. The access location was Skull Cliff itself. That's when I realized something out there was responding to the mapping system. It wasn't random. It was drawing me in. That night I didn't sleep. The stars above the canyon looked clearer than ever, but I didn't trust them. My compass pointed west no matter how I turned, and the wind carried the same low dragging sound, only now between the gusts I heard another noise. Footsteps. Soft, slow, careful. I waited, holding my breath. They stopped right outside my tent. I turned on my flashlight, but on the sand, clear as day, were footprints, heavy and long, like someone had been walking in circles around my camp all night. Each set led toward the edge of the cliff, and each one stopped there, right where the land drops into the canyon. By morning, the air smelled different. Damp, like rain was coming, even though the sky was empty. The GPS showed new data again, but this time it wasn't points. It was movement. Something under the surface was slowly shifting east. When I followed the direction, I found a small crack in the ground, wide enough to see darkness below. It wasn't a cave. It looked like the earth itself had been lifted and folded open. Inside, I saw something that froze me. A piece of metal, not rusted, not natural, with markings in the same grid pattern I'd seen on my screen the night before. And on it, a single word scratched into the surface. Home. I reached out to touch it. The second my fingers brushed it, my GPS started beeping again. Every device in the tablet, the drone controller, even my watch, lit up with the same message. Coordinates confirmed. Home reached. Then the ground trembled, softly at first, then harder. The cliff below me gave off a deep echoing sound like something hollow breathing through stone. I ran back toward camp, but my path was gone, replaced by a stretch of ground I didn't remember crossing before. By the time I reached my tent, it was empty. Everything, and the tripod, the tablet, even my backpack, was gone. Only the cairn of stones remained, and on the top the white oval piece of bone. But this time the bone wasn't cold, it was warm. When I looked down at my GPS, it had drawn a new shape on its own. It wasn't a triangle anymore. It was a spiral, curling inward toward the word home. I turned it off, packed what little I had, and walked for hours until I saw my truck again. But here's the part that still keeps me awake. When I finally drove out of the canyon, my radio came to life for the first time in days. A voice whispered through static, "Survey complete. Welcome home." My name is Tom Avery. I worked as a park ranger for 12 years in Arizona, first at Marble Canyon, then later near a restricted zone people call Skull Cliff. It's one of the loneliest places I've ever been. No crowds, no gift shops, just endless red stone, high winds, and a silence so heavy that sometimes it makes your ears ring. Our job wasn't exciting. Mostly paperwork, weather reports, checking trails, warning tourists not to go off route. But the one thing I liked about the night shifts was listening to the radio. All the park units stay in touch over short-range frequencies. You hear everything through that box. Lost hikers, rescue calls, maintenance chatter. At night, it's like the air itself talks. Back in 2019, we started getting strange reports, faint voices, broken transmissions, and location beacons that didn't exist on any map. It started small. One night, while monitoring Channel 7, I heard a distress call. "Ranger 1, this is Unit 4B. Copy, we're stuck at Checkpoint Delta, over." I checked the call log. There was no Unit 4B. No one had used that designation in more than 30 years. I answered anyway. "Unit 4B, identify your location, static." Then again, "Checkpoint Delta, visibility low. Send help." I pulled up our coordinates list. There was no checkpoint by that name anywhere near Skull Cliff. My partner, Ranger Willis, came in with coffee. When I told him, he laughed. "Could be an old signal bouncing off canyon walls," he said. "These radios echo for miles." Maybe he was right. But I still logged it like protocol says. The next night, the same voice came through again. Only this time it said my name. "Avery, can you copy?" I froze. No one outside the station knew I was on duty that late. "Avery, it's 4B, you were supposed to check Delta." I picked up the mic, heart pounding. "Unit 4B, identify yourself." A pause. Then a quiet reply, soft and flat. "You did. Once." Before I could respond, the radio hissed and went silent. I tried tracing the signal, but the system gave an error. Source unknown. Archive frequency. That meant the signal came from a range we didn't even use anymore. It had been decommissioned in 1983. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I told my supervisor. He brushed it off, said it was probably an interference pattern or old equipment crosstalk. But the look in his eyes said something else, like he'd heard of this before and didn't want to admit it. For the next week, I left the radio on every night, even when I wasn't working. Most nights, nothing. Just the wind pushing static through the speaker. But on the 7th night, the voice returned. "Ranger Avery, still at Delta." This time I recorded it. The voice sounded human, tired, low. But when I analyzed the file later, it had no frequency profile. The waveform was flat, like the sound was being generated from inside the system instead of transmitted through it. I traced the source again. It pointed to an old location code, Station 9 near the edge of Skull Cliff. That place had been shut down since the 1970s after a landslide buried part of the access road. Nobody had gone there in decades. The next evening, I drove out to check it myself. The road was barely there, washed out, cracked, half covered with sand. By the time I reached the gate, the sun was down. The sign read, "U.S. Park Service, Outpost 9, closed since 1974. The padlock was rusted, but it broke easily. Inside, everything smelled of dust and metal. Old ranger gear hung on hooks. There were maps with circles drawn in red marker. And in the corner, still plugged into the wall, was a radio set, its indicator light still glowing green. That's impossible. The power grid doesn't reach this far. I sat down, picked up the mic and said, "Station 9, this is Ranger Avery. Who's been transmitting on this channel?" The speaker crackled. For a few seconds, nothing. Then I heard footsteps, faint but clear, echoing from the other end of the line. "We're still at Delta," the voice said again. "Can you see the light?" I looked around. Out the window across the canyon, a small red light blinked in the distance. Once, twice. Then it vanished. I asked, "What light?" The voice came back. "Yours." The bulb above me flickered and went out. The radio hissed louder, like breathing through static. Every channel filled with whispers overlapping each other. Old call signs repeating, old badge numbers, some of them belonging to rangers who had died years ago.
Unit 3 Alpha?
Lost signal. Need location fix. Ranger Lewis. Can't find the ridge. Avery. Avery, you never left. I unplugged the set. The light stayed on. The whispers didn't stop. That was the first time I ran from a ranger station. When I got back to base, I told Willis what happened. He didn't laugh this time. He just said quietly, "You should never have gone there." I tried to pull the recording from my handheld. The file was gone. The folder name had changed to 4B active. Every time I turned on my radio after that, I heard faint beeping, like an SOS signal. But it wasn't coming from anyone on the grid. It pulsed once every 6 seconds. The pattern didn't match Morse code or emergency frequencies. When I graphed it, it drew a shape, a map outline of Skull Cliff. And right in the center was a blinking dot labeled Delta. I tried ignoring it. But at night, the sound came through my walls even when the radio was off, faint static under my breathing. 2 weeks later, we got a report from hikers about lights flashing deep in the restricted zone. I volunteered to check. Willis refused to go. He said he'd already been once. I hiked in before sunrise. The ground was rough, sand, stone, dry brush. By noon, I reached the ridge that looked over the canyon. Down below, in a small clearing, something metal reflected the sun. It was a radio tower, half collapsed, covered in vines and dust. And beside it, in the dirt, were 4 ranger badges laid neatly in a circle. The names were barely visible. One of them was mine. I backed away, heart racing. The badges looked old, rusted, discolored, but the dirt around them was freshly disturbed. The static in my headset grew louder until it hurt my ears. Then through the noise, that same voice said, "Ranger Avery, checkpoint Delta confirmed. Returning signal." The tower began to glow faint red at the base and like a coil heating up. The ground trembled softly. I dropped my radio and ran. The static followed me all the way back to my truck, not fading until I reached the main road. When I got home, my house lights were already on. I didn't remember leaving them that way. The radio on my kitchen counter was lit too. Its speaker hissed softly. Then I heard it, my own voice. "This is Ranger Avery, Unit 4B. We're stuck at Checkpoint Delta. Visibility low. Send help." The next morning, I brought the radio to headquarters. They ran diagnostics. They said it had no power source, no battery, no record of transmission. Just one saved file. Ranger Avery, active on Channel 7. I quit a week later. I left my badge on the desk, but some nights I still hear that faint beeping. One pulse every 6 seconds. Always in the same rhythm. Sometimes it gets stronger when I'm near the desert, like it's calling me back. I don't answer anymore, but I know what I'll hear if I ever do. "Checkpoint Delta, you did once." My name is Rachel Dunn. I worked for a small tour company in Arizona that took travelers into the Grand Canyon's lesser-known trails. Most of our clients were families, hikers, or photographers chasing the sunrise. In 2021, I was leading a 2-day private trip. 4 tourists, 1 assistant, and me. We started early, driving down a rough access road past the visitor zone, into an area known by locals as Skull Cliff Basin. It wasn't on any public route. We needed special permission to go there. The view was incredible. Deep red cliffs and layers of stone glowing like fire when the sun hit. Everyone was in good spirits. They laughed, took pictures, pointed at lizards, and asked me the same question tourists always ask. Has anyone ever gotten lost down here? I said no, but that wasn't true. We'd lost radio contact with groups before, short blackouts that lasted an hour or two. It's just the terrain, I told myself. The canyon swallow sound and signals. We set up camp near a dry riverbed around 4 p.m. The light there always feels strange, soft but too golden, like sunset lasts too long. While unpacking, one of the guests, a man named Lewis, pointed at the cliff behind us. Looks like faces carved into the rock, he said. I looked up. He wasn't wrong. The erosion patterns made the cliffside look like skulls, dozens of them, some small, some larger than cars. That's how the area got its name. By evening, we had a small fire going. Everyone shared stories, passed snacks, and watched the stars come out. The canyon goes completely silent at night. No birds, no insects, no air movement. It's beautiful, but unnatural. Around 9 p.m., my assistant Jared said his GPS was acting up. The tracker showed our camp was moving slowly north even though we hadn't left. I laughed it off as a satellite drift. Then the stars above us shifted. At least, that's what it looked like. The constellations tilted slightly, as if someone had turned the sky. Jared said, "That's impossible." The others thought it was part of the experience. They took pictures and clapped. At midnight, the campfire died down. Everyone went to their tents. The air turned cold fast. Before sleeping, I checked my watch, 12:37 a.m. When I woke up later, it still said 12:37. I woke to voices outside my tent. Soft talking. Someone said, "It's different." I stepped out. The riverbed was gone. In its place was flat stone, smooth as glass. The cliffs were darker now, almost black, and the stars looked lower, hanging too close. Lewis and Jared stood by the edge whispering. "What's going on?" I asked. Jared's voice was shaky. "My GPS says we're 2 miles west of our camp." But I never moved. All our equipment, tents, bags, cooler, was still there. Everything looked normal except for the ground itself. It wasn't sand anymore. It was solid rock, like the canyon had sealed overnight. One of the tourists, a woman named Clara, pointed her phone at the sky. "Even the stars look fake," she said. She was right. When she zoomed in with her camera, the stars didn't twinkle. They pulsed faintly, like tiny signals. We decided to pack up and hike back to the trailhead at first light. Except when the sun came up, it rose from the wrong direction. The cliffs threw shadows the opposite way from before. Lewis asked, "Could we have camped somewhere else?" I wanted to say yes, but the landmarks were gone. No trees, no dry stream, no familiar ridges. Just wide, empty stones stretching forever. The GPS still said we were moving north even though we stood still. Every time I looked at the map, our location icon slid across the screen, gliding slowly, smoothly, like the earth was drifting beneath us. By noon, everyone was panicking. We decided to retrace our steps using compass bearings, but the compass needle spun in circles. The tourists were sweating, tired, scared. I tried to calm them. I told jokes. I pointed out shapes in the rocks. But inside, I felt something else. A pressure deep in my chest, like the canyon was watching. We finally found what looked like an old campsite, half buried under dust. There were melted metal poles, a torn tarp, and what looked like a burnt camera. When Jared picked it up, the power light blinked once, green, and then died. On its cracked screen, one image showed for a second before fading. 5 people standing in front of a tent. Their faces were blurred, but the tent behind them was ours. That was when Lewis ran. He sprinted toward the nearest ridge, shouting, "We're not supposed to be here." By the time we caught up, he was gone. No tracks, no footprints, no echo of his voice. We spent the next hour calling his name. Only our own voices came back. At sunset, we gave up. The air grew still again, that dead kind of silence that eats every sound. The sky turned red, then purple, then pitch black in seconds. When I looked at my watch, it still said 12:37 We didn't sleep that night. Jared kept whispering, "We're moving. We're moving." Even though we sat still. The GPS blinked every few minutes, showing new coordinates we couldn't follow. By dawn, Clara noticed her phone battery was somehow at 90%, even though she hadn't charged it. When she opened her gallery, it was full. Hundreds of new photos we hadn't taken. The images showed us hiking, sitting by a campfire, standing near cliffs that didn't exist. In some of them, we were smiling. In others, we were facing the camera while something tall and pale stood behind us, half hidden by fog. Every image was time-stamped exactly at 12:37 a.m. We couldn't explain it. Jared wanted to destroy the phones. Clara wanted to keep them, proof for the Rangers. I just wanted out. We hiked all day toward where the sun should have been setting, hoping to hit the main road. But the light didn't change. It stayed frozen in late afternoon, a yellow glow that never turned gold. The shadows stayed in the same place. The air felt heavier, like gravity itself was thicker. Then, right before dusk, we saw Lewis. He was standing about 50 yards away near a stone column. We shouted his name, but he didn't move. When I got closer, I saw he wasn't standing. He was part of the rock. His skin had taken the color of sandstone. His face was frozen mid-scream, mouth open, eyes hollow. The cliff had swallowed him halfway, as if the rock had grown around his body. Clara fell to her knees. Jared tried to pull him free, but the stone was solid. His fingers came away with dust, red dust that smelled like iron. That's when I heard the sound, a deep, slow rumble, like something enormous exhaling below us. The ground shifted once. A crack split the stone near our feet. The GPS beeped one last time and shut off. We ran until dark. No sense of direction, no idea which way was out. We found a cave and hid inside until dawn. The light outside never changed. No wind, no time, no sound. When I finally woke, or maybe blacked out, the cave was empty. No Jared, no Clara. Only their packs, and a single phone still glowing. On its screen was a photo of me, sleeping inside the cave. Timestamp, 12:37 and I don't remember how I got out. I woke up 3 days later in a ranger's truck near the highway. They said they found me walking barefoot in circles, sunburned but alive. No sign of the others, no gear, no tracks, nothing. When they checked my phone, every photo had vanished. The memory card showed 0 files. But here's the strange part. When the Rangers synced my GPS log, it showed my coordinates shifting slowly north for exactly 37 hours, before stopping at a place labeled only as return. The official report called it equipment malfunction. I quit that week. Sometimes I still dream of that canyon, the light that never changed, the photos that took themselves, and the faces carved in the rock. And when I wake, my clock always reads 12:37 a.m. every time. My name is Daniel Cross, and for most of my life I've trusted a compass more than people. I worked in geological surveying for the state, mapping fault lines, collecting mineral samples, updating terrain data for research. I'm not a scientist, not really. I just walk, measure, and write down what the Earth is doing. In 2022, the department assigned me to a study near Skull Cliff, a remote section of the Grand Canyon. They'd been tracking strange magnetic readings there for years. Something in the rock made compasses spin, GPS units fail, even aircraft instruments glitch. They wanted me and my partner, Marcus Hale, to check it in person. Marcus was the kind of man who joked through danger. He called us the Compass Men, said it made us sound like explorers from a movie. We arrived in early October. The drive took 6 hours, 3 on paved highway, then another 3 on dirt and gravel. The road ended at a small clearing surrounded by stone ridges. It was quiet. No birds, no wind. When I took out my compass, the needle spun in full circles, fast at first, then slower, then stopped, pointing southwest instead of north. Marcus laughed. Guess north called in sick. I tried my backup compass. Same thing. The magnetometer on our laptop showed constant fluctuations. Small, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. I looked up. The cliffs seemed to pulse faintly under the light, like shadows moving without wind. We set up camp near a rock formation shaped like a pyramid. Marcus said it looked man-made. I said erosion can make anything look man-made if you stare long enough. But that night, as we sat by the fire, he pointed at the ridge and said, "See that glow? It's not firelight." I followed his gaze. A faint red shimmer ran along the cliff's edge, slow like lava under skin. Then it faded. We thought it might be heat distortion, but the temperature was dropping fast. Marcus went to check his phone compass app. It showed 2 north points, then one at the top of the screen, and another slightly below it, pulsing red. He said, "Guess we're standing between 2 magnets." I didn't laugh. The next morning, Marcus wanted to test the readings deeper in the canyon. We packed our gear and followed the compass needle as it spun slowly like a clock hand searching for something. Every 20 steps, it would stop for a few seconds, always pointing to the same spot, a narrow crevice in the cliff wall about 30 feet high. When we got there, the air inside the gap was cooler, heavy, almost wet. My magnetometer beeped faster the closer I got. Marcus leaned in and said, "It's like the rock's breathing." Inside the crack, the stone wasn't red like the rest of the canyon. It was black, smooth and glassy like obsidian. I ran my gloved hand along it and felt a faint vibration, steady as a heartbeat. Then my glove stuck for a second, as if the rock had pulled back. Not hard, just enough to hold. I jerked away, heart pounding. A thin layer of frost coated the glove where I'd touched the stone. Marcus touched it too. The magnetometer went crazy, numbers flashing faster than I could read. Then his compass needle snapped off and stuck to the rock by itself. We both backed away fast. Neither of us said anything for a while. After a few minutes, Marcus whispered, "Maybe the readings are underground, like an iron core or meteorite." That made sense. Until I looked at the ground, the sand near the wall wasn't sand anymore. It was tiny metal flakes, thousands of them, shimmering faintly, all aligned in the same direction. When I moved my boot, they shifted as one, like a school of fish. We packed our equipment and decided to hike back, but the compass still refused to behave. Every few minutes it pointed toward our own camp, even though we were walking away from it. By sunset, the temperature dropped again. We reached camp and started a small fire. Marcus sat staring at his compass app, silent for once. I asked, "What's wrong?" He turned the screen to me. It showed both our names, Daniel and Marcus, displayed where the cardinal directions should be. Each name had an arrow under it pointing away from the other. He said quietly, "It's like something's trying to pull us apart." We didn't sleep. The compasses kept twitching on their own, clicking softly inside the metal casings like insects. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint scraping, like sand dragged across glass. At 3 a.m., Marcus shook me awake. "Danny, look," he pointed at the ridge. In the distance, the faint red glow was back, only this time it moved like a wave rolling through the canyon. Every rock surface shimmered briefly, then went dark. I checked the magnetometer. The numbers rose past maximum. The ground under us vibrated. The fire bent sideways, pulled toward the cliff as if gravity itself was shifting. Marcus shouted, "Turn off the electronics!" We killed everything and lights, radio, camera, but the glow didn't stop. Instead, our compasses began to spin in perfect sync, clockwise, faster and faster until the needles blurred. Then suddenly they froze, both pointing straight down. A low hum rose from the ground. Our tents rattled. The metal parts of our gear, forks, clips, watches, all slid slowly across the ground toward the pyramid rock. Marcus tried to grab his tablet, but it flew from his hands, hit the rock, and shattered. The metal pieces clung to the surface like magnets. Then the humming stopped. The air felt heavier, dense like underwater pressure. Marcus was standing near the edge of the camp staring at his broken compass. He said, "It's pulling again." Before I could answer, he stumbled forward a step, then another, as if invisible hands were guiding him. I ran and grabbed his arm. The pull was real. Something was tugging us both toward the pyramid rock. The sand moved with us, swirling in circles, metal flakes rising like dust in slow motion. I yelled, "Drop your belt!" "Metal's making it worse." He unbuckled it, but it didn't help. The force grew stronger. We dug our boots into the ground, leaning back as if fighting a current. Then as suddenly as it began, the pull stopped. Everything went silent, even the night insects. The ones we hadn't heard in days didn't return. The compass needles, still pointing down, began to rise again, slow and deliberate. They stopped facing north. This time both pointed west. Marcus laughed weakly. "Guess the canyon wants us to head home." We packed fast, loaded the truck, and drove until morning. Neither of us spoke until we reached the main road. At a gas station an hour later, I checked my dashboard compass. It was still pointing west, even when we turned north, even when we went east. I thought it was broken until I noticed something worse. The metal keychain compass on my backpack at home also spun on its own. At night, it stops perfectly, pointing west again toward Skull Cliff. 3 weeks later, Marcus texted me a photo. His kitchen utensils, forks, spoons, even nails from the wall, had turned, all facing the same direction. He wrote, "It's still pulling." I didn't reply. Because the same thing was happening in my house. When I wake up at night, my compass glows faintly in the dark. It hums just a little. And every time I turn it away, the needle slowly drifts back, pointing west, back to the canyon, back to Skull Cliff, back to whatever it was that wanted us to follow. My name is Eddie Lawson, and I've been a miner for 20 years. I've worked in coal shafts, salt tunnels, and desert quarries all over Arizona. Nothing ever scared me underground, until Skull Cliff. The job came in September of last year. A small private company called Terra Depth Resources hired me to check a series of old tunnels near the Grand Canyon. They claimed it was for geological mapping, looking for mineral veins and cave roots. But when I asked who used the tunnels before, they avoided the question. The site sat about 40 miles off the main road, down a dried riverbed surrounded by high red cliffs. The entrance was a narrow slit in the rock, reinforced with rusted steel beams that looked 100 years old. Above the gate, faint letters were carved, L3 restricted. The company sent me and one other man, Paul Mercer, an engineer from Nevada. He wasn't talkative, always staring at his handheld scanner, mumbling about unusual readings. Before we went in, he said something strange. "If you hear the signal, don't answer it." "Just keep walking." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. We went down with helmets, lights, and portable oxygen tanks. Standard gear. The first 100 meters were ordinary rock. But the deeper we went, the more unnatural it looked. Smooth walls with tool marks that didn't match modern drills. At about 300 feet, the tunnel split into two. The left side was marked sealed on our map, but the right side wasn't labeled at all. Paul said the scanner was detecting something metallic down there, deep inside the right tunnel. He looked nervous but kept going. I followed. The deeper we went, the stranger it got. The air was colder than it should have been, and the stone began to shimmer faintly, like fine silver dust mixed with sand. Every few steps I heard faint static in my headset, like radio interference. We weren't supposed to have any signal down there. At first I thought it was feedback. Then through the static I heard a voice. It sounded like Paul, but from ahead, though he was standing right next to me. "Eddie, you see this?" It said. I froze. Paul looked at me. "See what?" I didn't say anything, he added. That's when my headlamp flickered and I saw it. A pattern etched into the wall. Circles and lines burned into the rock, glowing faintly blue. It pulsed every few seconds in rhythm with the static. The voice came again, faint, broken but clearer. "Eddie, deeper." I turned to Paul. "That's not you?" He shook his head slowly. "That's the signal." We followed the right tunnel for almost an hour. It wound downward in sharp turns, twisting like something alive. The deeper we went, the louder the signal grew, sometimes clear, sometimes muffled, like whispers through a wall. Then all at once, it stopped. We entered a wide chamber, the largest I'd ever seen underground. The walls were covered in black stone, smooth and glassy like volcanic glass. In the middle of the floor sat a metal disc, half buried in rock. It looked ancient, rusted, covered in symbols that matched the glowing lines we saw earlier. Paul knelt beside it, scanning it with his device. "It's not natural," he said, "but it's not man-made either." The static returned, louder now, like someone breathing through the radio. Paul's scanner flashed red. He whispered, "It's transmitting." Then came the voice again, not one voice, but many overlapping like echoes. "Leave." Not meant. For light, we both froze. The words were clear, not random noise. They sounded almost human, but stretched, distorted, too slow. I looked at the walls and realized something was wrong. They weren't smooth anymore, they were shifting. Tiny patterns moved beneath the surface like veins pulsing under skin. Paul backed away from the disc, but the floor began to hum softly. Our helmets vibrated. I turned off my light. Even in darkness, the chamber glowed faintly, lit from inside the walls. The overlapping voices turned into one, calm, low, and near. "You were not called." Paul screamed and ran toward the tunnel. I followed, but before I reached the exit, my radio flared with static again, and his voice came through. "Eddie, wait, look." But when I turned around, he wasn't there. Just his dropped scanner, still glowing red. I grabbed it and ran. The tunnel behind me seemed to stretch longer, like the walls were moving. Every few steps I saw flashes, shapes in the dark, pale hands pressing out from the rock, faces forming for a second, then sinking back. When I finally reached the junction where the tunnel split, I stopped to catch my breath. I waited for Paul. He never came. I surfaced alone after nearly 5 hours underground. The company's field truck was still there, parked near the canyon ridge. No sign of Paul. I radioed base camp, told them he was missing. They sent a search crew, professional cavers with sonar and rescue dogs. They went down the same tunnel. 2 hours later, they came back up, pale and shaking. They said the right tunnel didn't exist, just solid stone where the entry had been. When they showed me the photos from their helmet cams, the rock wall looked untouched. No crack, no steel beams, nothing. I tried to show them the scanner I'd taken from Paul, but it was dead. The power light blinked once, then the screen filled with static and burned out. When they checked the data card, it was full of corrupted files. Only one image half visible. A metal disc glowing under dim blue light, and 2 shadows standing beside it. The company shut down the site within a week. They called it a structural collapse. I quit right after, but the nightmares started soon after that. I dream of tunnels that breathe, In the dream, Paul's voice calls me from deep below, repeating my name. When I wake, I sometimes hear faint static from my radio, even though it's unplugged. 2 months later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was Paul's ID badge, still attached to his lanyard. The plastic was warped, like it had been melted from inside. On the back, scratched in shaky letters, were 3 words: "Signal still alive." I tried to ignore it, tried to move on. But something keeps pulling me back. Last week I drove near Skull Cliff again. The canyon road was closed, but at night from a distance I saw faint blue light flickering against the rock walls, like a heartbeat. And for a moment through the open truck window I heard static and a single whisper, soft but clear: "Eddie." When I turned the radio off, it didn't stop. It just got louder. I don't go underground anymore, but sometimes late at night my house lights flicker, and my compass needle points down, and I know the signal is still calling. My name is Laura Grant, and I used to work for the Arizona Park Service as a seasonal ranger. Most of my duties were simple: guiding hikers, checking campsites, and making sure tourists stayed on marked trails. But 3 summers ago, I helped with an operation that still keeps me awake at night. We called it the Lost Camp Below Ridge 9. It started when a pair of backpackers came into our outpost one morning, pale and shaking. They claimed they'd found an abandoned campsite deep below Ridge 9, a restricted zone near the Skull Cliff section of the canyon. They said it looked like people had been living there recently, but the equipment was decades old. Old lanterns, tin food cans, film cameras, everything frozen in time, covered in dust. At first we thought they'd stumbled on a ranger base from the 1950s, but when they handed us the camera they'd found there, we knew something was off. It was a Kodak film camera that still had fresh film inside. When our tech developed the photos, the images were clear, but impossible. Each picture showed the same 4 tents from different angles. In some shots you could see figures sitting by a fire, silhouettes blurry but real. In others the same camp was empty. And in the last frame the camera pointed directly upward, showing dark shapes leaning over the lens. Faces too long, eyes shining white. That was enough for the chief ranger to send a team out to verify the site. I volunteered to go. We set out the next morning. Me, my partner Rick Dalton, and an older ranger named Ellen Marks, who knew the Skull Cliff area better than anyone. It took us 5 hours of hard climbing just to reach the ridge. The canyon below looked endless, carved into sharp shadows. But the strangest thing was that none of our GPS units worked. The signal blinked, froze, and shut down completely. Ellen said quietly, "This place doesn't like being mapped." We followed the path the backpackers described, a narrow descent along the cliff wall that led to a flat area below. Sure enough, there it was. 4 old tents arranged in a circle, half buried in red dust. A campfire pit in the center, still filled with blackened wood that looked fresh. The tents were made of thick green canvas, military style, maybe from the 1960s. The zippers were rusted, but when I unlatched one, the inside was dry, almost untouched. A sleeping bag lay open on the floor. Next to it sat a tin mug, still half full of something black and hardened. Rick called out from the next tent, "Laura, come look at this." Inside, a metal box was open on the ground. It contained film rolls labeled with dates: August 1978, August 1979, August 1980. But they weren't dusty. They looked new. Ellen was standing near the fire pit, staring at something buried in the ash. She knelt and brushed the soot away with her glove. Beneath the burned wood was a small metal tag, engraved with a number, NPS 479. That was a Park Service tag, the kind issued to field researchers. But the database showed no record of a team with that number. When I looked up, I saw movement near the tree line. Something gray and tall slipped between the rocks, not an animal, not quite human. It moved like someone walking uphill in reverse, limbs bending wrong. I blinked and it was gone. Rick said maybe it was a hiker or a trick of the light, but Ellen whispered, "No one's been allowed here since '82. We radioed the outpost. Static. No signal again. We decided to photograph the site ourselves. As I took pictures, I noticed something strange in my camera's viewfinder. Faint smoke rising from one of the tents. But when I lowered the camera, there was no smoke at all. I took another photo. The same thing, and the camp looked alive through the lens, fire glowing, shadows moving. But with my eyes, it was still and dead." Rick looked uneasy. "Maybe light distortion," he said. But the sun had already dipped low behind the ridge, and the air was perfectly still. Ellen stepped closer to the center of the camp and pointed to something scratched into the ground, faint letters drawn in dust. "We're still here," she said. "Looks recent." That's when we heard the first sound, a faint metallic click from inside one of the tents. Like a camera shutter, we froze. Rick whispered, "You heard that, right?" I nodded. He unzipped the tent and looked inside. Nothing. Just a folding chair and a lantern sitting on a small table. He lifted the lantern. It was warm. We decided to leave before nightfall. But when we turned back toward the trail, it wasn't there. The path we'd used to climb down was gone, or maybe hidden in the shadows. Ellen tried the radio again, her voice shaking. "Ridge team to base, come in." A burst of static answered, and then a clear voice, faint but unmistakable. "Leave. Before dark." It wasn't any of ours. It was a woman's voice, trembling like it was echoing through metal. Ellen dropped the radio. That was the moment we realized something was wrong with the air. It felt heavy, like pressure underwater. The shadows were stretching across the canyon floor faster than the sunset could explain. We had no choice but to set up camp there for the night. We built a small fire using the old wood we found. The smell was odd, not like smoke, more like burning soil. Rick kept checking his compass. The needle twitched constantly, pointing nowhere. Ellen sat near the fire, staring at the old tents. She said softly, "This looks like a camp I heard about once. Back in the '70s. They sent a team to map mineral veins near Skull Cliff. They never came back." I said, "You think this is their camp?" She nodded. "They said they vanished without a trace." The fire cracked suddenly, sending sparks upward, and in the orange light, I saw 4 silhouettes standing just beyond the glow. They weren't moving. They were spaced evenly like sentries. I blinked. Gone. Rick swore under his breath and said he saw them too. We grabbed our flashlights. No footprints, no sound, just the echo of wind returning to the canyon. A few minutes later, Ellen said she heard whispering. We listened. It came from the direction of the tents. Quiet at first, then clearer. A mix of voices overlapping like a radio out of tune. "Still here, still here," Rick whispered. "Maybe the wind." But the air was dead still. Then one of the lanterns inside the far tent flickered on. It wasn't ours. It gave off a dull yellow glow, just enough to see shadows moving inside. I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" No answer, just a faint click like a camera again. Ellen stepped forward, shaking. "Don't." But Rick went anyway. He pushed the tent flap open, and froze. I ran to him and looked inside. There were photos taped all over the walls. Hundreds of them. Old color-faded shots of people sitting by the same campfire. Men and women in ranger uniforms. But in the newer photos, the faces were different. One of them was Rick, another was me. Each picture was stamped with a year. The last one said 2021. That was impossible. I ripped one off the wall. The photo was warm, like it had just come out of a camera. Rick backed away, shaking his head. "This isn't real," he said. "It can't be." Then the whispering turned to laughter, soft, broken, coming from every direction. The tents began to sway, even though there was no wind. The shadows inside stretched upward, taller and taller until they merged into one shape. Thin, black, headless. Ellen screamed and threw the lantern into the dirt. The flame went out instantly. We ran. Didn't pack. Didn't think. We just ran toward the ridge, hoping to find the way up. I don't know how we made it. The next thing I remember, we were back at base camp, sun already high. They said we'd been gone 2 nights, not 1. The rescue log said the team searching for us heard faint radio clicks near Ridge 9, but every recording they played back was silent. Rick quit the Park Service that week. Ellen retired a few months later. As for me, I still work here. But sometimes when I patrol near Skull Cliff, I find fresh footprints leading off the main trail. Always 4 sets. And last year, during a routine sweep, one of our rangers turned in a camera she found lying in the dirt. The first photo on the roll was of me, Rick and Ellen, sitting around a fire we never remembered lighting. And the second photo was the same scene but empty. Just 3 shadows burned into the ground, shaped like people sitting there once waiting to be remembered.